David Richardson stood in the first-class cabin of his private jet, looking out at the New York skyline through the small window. The Singapore deal had wrapped up 3 days earlier than expected, and for once in his life he decided not to fill those extra days with more meetings. His assistant had already rescheduled everything, probably thinking he was coming down with something. After all, David Richardson never came home early from business trips. The flight attendant offered him another coffee, but he waved her away. His mind was elsewhere, thinking about his 8-year-old daughter Lucy. When was the last time he had surprised her? When was the last time he had seen her face light up just because he walked through the door? The thought made his chest tight with something he rarely allowed himself to feel: guilt. The car ride from the airport to his Manhattan penthouse took 45 minutes through traffic. David sat in the back of his black sedan, scrolling through emails on his phone, but his heart wasn't in it. He kept thinking about Lucy's last piano recital. He had missed it, of course. There had been an emergency board meeting about the merger. There was always something. His driver pulled up to the sleek glass building that housed his penthouse. The doorman nodded respectfully as David walked through the marble lobby toward his private elevator. He lived on the top 2 floors, a space that cost more than most people would see in several lifetimes. But as the elevator climbed, David found himself wondering if all that space just made it easier for him and Lucy to avoid each other. The elevator doors opened directly into his home. Usually the place was silent except for the hum of expensive air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city below. But today was different. Today he could hear something unexpected: music. David stopped in his entryway, listening. It wasn't coming from the sound system. This was live music, someone playing piano, and not just playing but teaching. He could hear a woman's voice, patient and encouraging, and then Lucy's laugh. His daughter's laugh, a sound he realized he hadn't heard in weeks. He set down his briefcase quietly and followed the sound down the hallway toward Lucy's wing of the apartment. The music was coming from her playroom, a space he had designed to have everything a child could want but rarely visited himself. As he got closer, he could make out words: "That's perfect, sweetie. Now try it again, but this time, imagine you're telling a story with your fingers. What story do you want to tell?" David reached the doorway and stopped completely. The scene in front of him was nothing like what he expected to find in his own home. A young woman sat at Lucy's small white piano, her back to the door. She wasn't wearing the gray uniform that his housekeeping staff always wore. Instead, she had on a simple yellow dress that somehow made the whole room feel brighter. Her hair was natural and pulled back in a way that looked effortless but elegant. But it was Lucy who made David's breath catch. His daughter was sitting right next to the woman on the piano bench, closer than she ever sat to anyone. Lucy's whole body was focused on the keys, her small hands moving carefully as the woman guided her. There was something in Lucy's posture, in the way she held her head, that David hadn't seen before. She looked confident. She looked happy. "Like this?" Lucy asked, pressing out a simple melody. "Exactly like that. You're a natural storyteller. I can hear adventure in those notes. Where is your story taking us?" Lucy giggled and played the melody again, this time with more confidence. "It's about a princess who lives in a castle in the clouds and she's looking for her lost friend." "Oh, I can definitely hear that. And listen, when you play these lower notes, it sounds like she's calling out. Can you try calling for her friend?" David watched as Lucy experimented with different keys, her face completely absorbed in the music. He had bought her piano lessons with the best teachers money could hire, but he had never seen her enjoy it like this. Usually, practice time ended in tears and arguments with whatever nanny was working that week. The woman's teaching style was completely different from anything David had seen. She wasn't drilling techniques or demanding perfection. She was making the music into a game, a story, something fun, and Lucy was responding in ways that surprised him. "Miss Ava, can we try the song about the ocean again?" Lucy asked. Ava, so that was her name. David found himself studying her more carefully. There was something about the way she carried herself that didn't match his assumptions. She moved with the confidence of someone educated, someone who belonged at a piano bench. Her voice had a slight accent he couldn't place, and when she spoke about music, she used terms that suggested real training. "Of course we can. But first, tell me what the ocean is feeling today. Is it calm, stormy, playful?" Lucy thought for a moment, swinging her legs from the bench. "It's playful. Like it wants to splash and dance. Perfect. So how do you think playful ocean music should sound? As Lucy began to play, David realized he was witnessing something he had never expected to see in his own home. His daughter learning with joy. Every music teacher he had hired had focused on proper posture, correct fingering, and rigid practice schedules. This woman, this Ava, was teaching Lucy to love music itself. But who was she? David's mind began racing. He employed a full staff to manage his household, and every single person was thoroughly vetted by his security team. Background checks, reference checks, the works. He knew everyone who had access to his home, especially anyone who had access to Lucy. He had never seen this woman before in his life. His daughter was sitting in his living room with a complete stranger, and somehow his staff had allowed this to happen. The protective part of his mind, the part that had built walls around his family since his wife's death 3 years ago, began to kick in. How had this person gotten into his home? Who had hired her? Why didn't he know about it? But even as these questions flooded his mind, he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. Lucy was more engaged and happy than she had been in months. The woman, Ava, was gentle and patient in ways that his expensive nannies had never managed to be. There was something genuine happening here, something real. David stood in the doorway, torn between his instinct to protect his daughter and his amazement at seeing her so completely at ease. He found himself holding his breath, not wanting to break the spell that had transformed his usually quiet, withdrawn child into this confident little girl who was making music with such joy. The song came to an end and Lucy clapped her hands together. That was perfect. Did you hear how it sounded like waves? I did. You're getting so good at painting pictures with music. Your daddy is going to be so proud when he hears how much you've learned. At the mention of himself, David felt a strange mix of emotions. When was the last time Lucy had been excited to show him something? When was the last time she had looked forward to his approval? He knew he had to step into the room, had to announce himself, but part of him wanted to stay in this doorway forever, watching his daughter be genuinely happy. Because he had a feeling that as soon as he revealed himself, everything would change. The questions would start, the explanations would be demanded, and this perfect moment would shatter. But he couldn't stand there forever. Taking a deep breath, David cleared his throat softly. Both Lucy and Ava turned toward the door. Lucy's face transformed with surprise and delight. "Daddy, you're home early!" And Ava looked at him with eyes that were intelligent, calm, and completely unafraid. She stood gracefully from the piano bench, smoothed her yellow dress, and smiled at him with the kind of confidence that told him there was much more to this story than he had imagined. Lucy jumped up from the piano bench and ran straight into David's arms, nearly knocking him over with her enthusiasm. He caught her and lifted her up, feeling how much she had grown since he last really held her like this. When had she gotten so tall? "Daddy, you have to hear what I learned." "Miss Ava taught me how to make the piano sound like rain and thunder and even like birds singing." "Want me to show you?" David looked over Lucy's shoulder at the woman who was still standing by the piano. She hadn't moved to leave or shown any of the nervous energy he usually saw from his staff when he arrived unexpectedly. Instead, she was watching the reunion between father and daughter with a gentle smile, as if she understood something about their relationship that he didn't. "In a minute, sweetheart," David said, setting Lucy down but keeping his hands on her shoulders. "First, I'd like to talk to Miss Ava, was it? Ava Johnson," she said, extending her hand with the same confidence she had shown while teaching. "It's nice to finally meet you, Mr. Richardson. Lucy talks about you all the time." David shook her hand, noting that her grip was firm, and her hands felt like those of someone who played piano seriously. Calloused fingertips, strong but gentle. "I'm sure she does. Though I have to admit, I'm a bit confused about how you came to be here. I don't recall hiring a new music teacher." "Mrs. Chen hired me to help with Lucy during the day shift," Ava explained. "I work with her in the afternoons while Mrs. Chen handles other household duties. I started about 2 weeks ago." Mrs. Chen was his head housekeeper, a woman who had been with his family for 5 years. She was trustworthy and efficient, but David couldn't remember her mentioning anything about hiring additional help. Then again, he rarely paid attention to the details of household management. That's what he paid people for. "And your background is in music education?" David asked, his tone becoming more formal. Something about this situation wasn't adding up. The woman spoke too well, carried herself too confidently, and taught too skillfully to be just a day shift helper. "Among other things," Ava said simply. Lucy tugged on David's sleeve. Daddy, Miss Ava used to play concerts. Real concerts in big theaters. She told me stories about playing for hundreds of people who would clap and clap when she finished. David's eyebrows went up. Concert pianist? That definitely didn't match the job description of household help. Is that so? And what concerts were those? Ava's smile flickered for just a moment. I performed with various orchestras and in recitals. But that was some time ago. My situation has changed. The vague answer only made David more suspicious. He had built a multi-billion-dollar empire by asking the right questions and not accepting surface explanations. What kind of situation changes does a concert pianist experience that leads them to household work? Daddy, why are you talking to Miss Ava like that? Lucy's voice cut through the tension. She's not in trouble, is she? She didn't do anything wrong. David looked down at his daughter and saw something in her expression that surprised him. Protectiveness. Lucy was actually defending this stranger. No, sweetheart, she's not in trouble. I'm just trying to understand how Miss Ava came to work for us. She didn't just come to work for us, Lucy said with the serious tone that always made her sound older than her 8 years. She came to help me. Mrs. Chen said I needed someone who could keep up with me, and Miss Ava is the smartest person I ever met. She knows about music and art and science and even about space. Did you know that Jupiter has storms that last for hundreds of years? David found himself looking back at Ava with renewed curiosity. Keeping up with Lucy was no small task. His daughter was intellectually gifted in ways that had challenged every nanny and tutor he had hired. Most of them lasted a few months before giving up, claiming that Lucy was too difficult, too demanding, or too smart for her own good. Jupiter's great red spot, Ava said to Lucy with a smile. And it's been raging for at least 350 years, maybe longer. Scientists think it might be getting smaller, though. See? Lucy said triumphantly. I told you she knows everything. David studied Ava more carefully. She wasn't just humoring his daughter. She genuinely knew what she was talking about. But that raised even more questions. Miss Johnson, I have to ask. With your background and education, why are you working as household help? It seems like you might be overqualified for this position. The question hung in the air, and David immediately regretted how it sounded. It came out more accusatory than curious, revealing assumptions he didn't realize he was making. But something about the situation made him uncomfortable, and he couldn't pinpoint why. Ava's expression changed slightly, becoming more guarded. Mr. Richardson, I understand your concern about having a stranger in your home with your daughter. If you'd like to check my references or discuss my qualifications with Mrs. Chen, I'm happy to provide any information you need. That's not exactly what I asked, David pressed. I'm wondering why someone with a background in concert performance is working a job that typically doesn't require those kinds of credentials. Lucy looked back and forth between her father and Ava, sensing something in the conversation that she didn't like. Daddy, you're being weird. Miss Ava is here because she likes teaching me, and I like learning from her. Isn't that enough? Out of the mouths of babes. David felt heat creep up his neck as he realized how his questioning was sounding to his 8-year-old daughter. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. I'm sorry if my questions seem intrusive, David said, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly sorry. It's just that in my experience, people usually work jobs that match their skill level. When they don't, there's usually a reason. Ava was quiet for a long moment, and David could see her deciding how much to share. You're right that there's a reason, she said finally. Life doesn't always go according to plan, Mr. Richardson. Sometimes circumstances change and you have to adapt. What kind of circumstances? Daddy! Lucy's voice was sharp with disapproval. You're being rude. Miss Ava doesn't have to tell you her private business. Mrs. Chen says it's not polite to ask people personal questions when they're just trying to do their job. David felt properly, chastened by his 8-year-old daughter, but his protective instincts were still on high alert. Lucy, I'm just trying to understand. Understand what? That Miss Ava is the best teacher I've ever had? That she actually listens to me and doesn't treat me like I'm stupid? That she makes learning fun instead of boring? Lucy's voice was getting louder, and David could see tears starting to form in her eyes. Why can't you just be happy that I'm happy? The words hit David like a physical blow. When was the last time Lucy had told him she was happy? When was the last time she had defended anyone or anything with such passion? Ava knelt down to Lucy's level.
Hey, it's okay.
Your daddy is just being protective. which is exactly what good daddies do. He wants to make sure you're safe and well cared for. That's actually really sweet. But he's making you sad, Lucy said, wiping her eyes. I can tell. I'm not sad, Ava said gently. I understand why he has questions. If I had a daughter as wonderful as you, I'd want to know everything about the people taking care of her too. David watched this exchange with growing discomfort. Not only was Ava handling Lucy's emotional outburst better than he usually did, but she was also defending him when he didn't deserve it. The grace in her response made his suspicious questioning seem petty and small. Miss Ava, he said, his tone softer now. I apologize if I came across as hostile. You're right that I'm protective of Lucy, perhaps overly so. It's just that she's been through a lot of changes with caregivers, and when I see her this attached to someone new, you worry about what happens when that person leaves, Ava finished for him. I understand completely. Lucy looked up at both adults. Nobody's leaving, right? Miss Ava, you're not going to leave just because Daddy asked too many questions, are you? Ava glanced at David before answering. That depends on whether your father feels comfortable with me continuing to work here. This is his decision to make. David found himself in an impossible position. His instincts told him that there was more to Ava Johnson's story than she was sharing. But his daughter was happier than he had seen her in months. And this woman had accomplished in 2 weeks what his expensive private tutors hadn't managed in years. I think, David said slowly, that I need to have a conversation with Mrs. Chen about how hiring decisions are made in this household. But for now, Lucy, why don't you show me that rain song you mentioned? Lucy's face brightened immediately, and she grabbed both adults by the hands, pulling them toward the piano. As David watched his daughter play the simple melody with more joy and confidence than he had ever seen her display, he couldn't shake the feeling that Ava Johnson was going to change their lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. He just wasn't sure if that was something to look forward to or something to fear. David couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the scene from Lucy's playroom, his daughter's face glowing with happiness, the mysterious woman who seemed too educated for her job, and the uncomfortable questions that had made him sound like exactly the kind of person he never wanted to be. By 6 a.m, he gave up on sleep and made his way to his home office. The space was all dark wood and leather, filled with awards and photos from business deals that had once seemed like the most important things in the world. Now sitting in his expensive chair, David found himself thinking about something much simpler, the sound of his daughter's laughter. He picked up his phone and called his head of security, James Mitchell. James had been with David for 8 years, handling everything from business threats to personal protection. If anyone could get answers about Ava Johnson, it was James. Morning, boss, James answered on the second ring. You're up early. I need you to run a background check on someone, David said without preamble. Ava Johnson. She's working in my home with Lucy. When do you need it? Yesterday. I want to know everything. Education, work history, why she's in New York, why she's working as household help when she claims to be a trained pianist. Something doesn't add up. James was quiet for a moment. You want me to go deep on this one? As deep as you can go without breaking any laws. And James, I need this to stay between us for now. 3 hours later, David was reviewing quarterly reports when James knocked on his office door. The security chief looked unusually serious as he entered, carrying a thick folder. You're not going to like what I found, James said, setting the folder on David's desk. David opened it and found himself looking at a photo of Ava that was clearly a professional headshot. She was wearing an elegant black dress sitting at a grand piano, her hair styled differently but with the same confident expression he had seen the day before. Ava Marie Johnson, James began, age 26. Born in Detroit, raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 5. Full scholarship to Juilliard School of Music. Graduated summa cum laude with a degree in piano performance and music education. David looked up sharply. Juilliard? Gets better. Or worse, depending on how you look at it. She was a rising star in the classical music world. Performed with the Detroit Symphony, Chicago Symphony, even had a debut at Carnegie Hall 3 years ago. Critics called her a once-in-a-generation talent. David flipped through pages of concert programs, newspaper reviews, and professional photos. This wasn't just someone who had taken piano lessons. This was a woman who had been on track for a major international career. So what happened? David asked, though he was beginning to dread the answer. Car accident 2 years ago. She was driving home from a performance in Boston when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car head-on. She spent 3 months in the hospital. James pulled out a medical report. Severe nerve damage to her left hand. Multiple fractures that healed poorly. She regained most of the use of her hand but lost the fine motor control needed for professional performance. Her concert career was over. David stared at the medical documents, feeling something cold settle in his stomach. And then, medical bills. Even with insurance, she was looking at hundreds of thousands in debt. Her savings were wiped out during the recovery period when she couldn't work. The music world moved on without her pretty quickly. It's not exactly known for loyalty to injured performers. So she came to New York? She came to New York because she still had connections here from her Juilliard days. She's been working multiple jobs, teaching private lessons in the evenings, working for cleaning services during the day, performing at small venues on weekends. Whatever she could find to pay the bills and chip away at the debt. David closed the folder, feeling sick. How did she end up working for us? Mrs. Chen found her through a domestic service agency. Johnson had applied for several tutoring positions, but kept getting passed over because she was overqualified. The agency suggested she might have better luck with general household work. Mrs. Chen was looking for someone who could handle Lucy's, James paused, diplomatically, intellectual needs. You mean someone who wouldn't quit after 2 weeks because my daughter is too smart for her own good? Something like that. Mrs. Chen interviewed several candidates, but Johnson was the only one who didn't seem intimidated by Lucy's questions about everything from quantum physics to ancient history. David leaned back in his chair, processing everything he had learned. The woman he had been suspicious of, the woman he had questioned like a criminal, was someone who had lost everything and was quietly rebuilding her life one day at a time. And somehow, in the middle of her own struggle, she had managed to give his daughter something precious, genuine excitement about learning. There's more, James said quietly. More? I talked to some of her former colleagues, people who knew her before the accident. Every single one of them said the same thing. She was not just talented, she was kind. She volunteered at schools in low-income neighborhoods, taught free lessons to kids who couldn't afford them. One teacher told me that Ava always said her goal was to make music accessible to everyone, not just people who could pay for it. David thought about how naturally Ava had connected with Lucy, how she had made learning feel like play instead of work. It wasn't just skill, it was genuine care. Boss? James' voice broke into his thoughts. What do you want to do with this information? Before David could answer, he heard familiar voices in the hallway outside his office. Lucy was talking animatedly about something, and he could hear Ava's patient responses. He got up and opened his door slightly, listening. Miss Ava, do you think we could write our own song today? Like a real song with words and everything? I think that's a wonderful idea. What would you want the song to be about? I want it to be about my mom. Daddy doesn't like talking about her much, but I remember things. I remember how she used to sing to me, and how she smelled like vanilla, and how she would dance around the kitchen when she was making breakfast. David felt his breath catch. Lucy never talked about her mother, not since the funeral 3 years ago. He had assumed she was too young to remember much, and he had been too wrapped up in his own grief to encourage the memories. That sounds like a beautiful song, Ava said gently. What's your favorite memory of her? She used to tell me that music was like magic, that it could make you feel better when you were sad or celebrate with you when you were happy. She said that's why it was important to learn to make music so you could have magic whenever you needed it. David had to lean against the wall. He remembered his wife saying exactly those words, remembered how she had insisted that Lucy should have piano lessons even though she was only 5 at the time. Your mom was very wise, Ava said. And you know what? She was right about music being magic. But the best kind of magic happens when you share it with people you love. So when we write this song about her, we'll be sharing her magic with the world. Do you think she would like our song? I think she would love it. And more than that, I think she would be so proud of the smart, creative, kind girl you're growing up to be. David heard Lucy sniffling and realized he was close to tears himself. In 5 minutes, this woman had given his daughter permission to remember her mother in a way he had never been able to provide. She had turned grief into something creative and healing. He closed his office door quietly and turned back to James. who was watching him with understanding eyes. "You heard?" David nodded, not trusting his voice. "She's good for Lucy," James said simply. "And from what I can tell, she's exactly who she appears to be. Someone who's been knocked down but isn't staying down." David looked at the folder again, thinking about the woman who had lost her career and was working 3 jobs to rebuild her life, who still found time to make his daughter feel heard and valued and loved. He thought about his own assumptions, his suspicions, and the way he had questioned her qualifications, instead of recognizing her gifts. "James, I need you to do something else for me." "What's that?" "I want you to look into those medical bills, the debt from her accident. Quietly. I want to know exactly what she owes and to whom." James raised an eyebrow. "Planning something?" "Maybe. But first I need to have a conversation with my daughter's teacher. A real conversation this time, not an interrogation." As James left with the folder, David sat back down at his desk and tried to figure out how to apologize to someone who had every right to walk away from his house and never come back. Because listening to Ava and Lucy talk about magic and music and mothers, he realized that losing her would be one of the biggest mistakes he could make. Not just for Lucy, but for himself too. Because in one day Ava Johnson had shown him things about his own daughter that he had been too busy to see. And maybe, if he was lucky, she could teach him how to be the kind of father Lucy deserved. David spent the rest of the morning working up the courage to have a real conversation with Ava. Every time he heard Lucy's voice down the hall, he started toward them, then changed his mind. How do you apologize to someone for judging them based on their circumstances? How do you admit that your assumptions revealed more about your own character than theirs? Around noon, he heard the front door close and Lucy calling out, "Bye, Miss Ava. See you tomorrow." He looked out his office window and saw Ava walking toward the subway station, a small backpack over her shoulder and her head held high despite everything she was carrying. "Daddy?" Lucy appeared in his doorway, still glowing from her morning lessons. "Are you okay? You look funny." "I'm fine, sweetheart. How was your time with Miss Ava today?" Lucy perked up immediately. "We wrote the song about Mommy, and Miss Ava taught me how to make chord progressions, which is like building the foundation of a house but with music. And she told me about this composer named Clara Schumann, who was married to another composer, but was actually more talented than he was. Except people didn't always recognize it because she was a woman." David smiled despite his complicated feelings. "That sounds like a very full morning. Miss Ava knows so many stories about musicians and scientists and artists. She makes everything connected, you know? Like she'll tell me about how mathematical patterns show up in music, and then we'll talk about how those same patterns appear in nature, like in flower petals and seashells." As Lucy continued chattering about her morning, David realized something that made his chest tight with regret. His daughter was describing the kind of education he had always wanted for her, one that connected ideas across disciplines, that encouraged curiosity, that made learning feel like an adventure. He had paid small fortunes to private schools and tutors trying to achieve exactly this, and it had taken a woman working multiple jobs to survive to actually deliver it. That evening, David did something he rarely did. He put away his work early and spent time with Lucy. They had dinner together at the kitchen table, instead of her eating with whatever nanny was on duty. While he worked through another business meal, Lucy told him more about the song she and Ava were writing, and David found himself sharing memories of her mother that he hadn't talked about in years. "Miss Ava was right," Lucy said as David tucked her into bed. "Talking about Mommy doesn't have to make me sad. It can make me happy too, remembering all the good things." "Miss Ava sounds very wise," David said, kissing Lucy's forehead. "She is. Daddy, you're not going to fire her, are you? Because of all those questions you asked?" David's heart clenched. "Why would you think that?" "Because that's what always happens. When I like someone, they go away. Mrs. Patterson said I was too much work, and Miss Rodriguez said I asked too many questions. And Tommy's mom stopped letting me come over because I knew more about space than Tommy did, and it made him feel bad." David sat down on the edge of Lucy's bed, feeling like someone had punched him in the stomach. "Lucy, has it been lonely for you? Not having friends or teachers who understand you?" Lucy nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Most people think I'm weird because I like learning about everything. But Miss Ava doesn't think I'm weird. She thinks I'm interesting. She says my brain is a gift, not a problem." David pulled his daughter into a hug, promising himself that he would never again allow his own fears and assumptions to threaten something this important to her. The next morning, David made sure he was waiting in the living room when Ava arrived for work. She seemed surprised to see him but greeted him politely. "Mr. Richardson, I wasn't expecting to see you this morning." "I was hoping we could talk," David said. "Before you start with Lucy." Something in his tone must have worried her because her expression became guarded. "Of course. Is there a problem?" "Yes, but not the kind you're thinking. The problem is with me, not with you." David gestured toward the couch. "Would you mind sitting down?" Ava perched on the edge of the couch, clearly ready to leave quickly if necessary. David sat across from her, trying to find the right words. "Miss Johnson, Ava, I owe you an apology. Yesterday I asked you a lot of questions that were inappropriate, and based on assumptions I shouldn't have made." "You were being protective of your daughter," Ava said carefully. "I understand that. No, I was being something else. I was being the kind of person who judges others based on their current circumstances, instead of their character or abilities. And that's not who I want to be, especially not in front of Lucy." Ava was quiet, watching him with those intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "I know about Juilliard," David continued. "I know about your performance career, and about the accident, and about what you've been doing to rebuild your life. I know because I had you investigated, which was invasive and wrong, and I'm sorry for that too." He saw a flash of something, hurt maybe, or disappointment, cross Ava's face before she composed herself again. "I see. What you've done for Lucy in just a few weeks is remarkable. She's happier, more confident, and more excited about learning than I've ever seen her. You've given her something I've been trying to buy for years: genuine educational engagement." "Lucy is an exceptional child," Ava said quietly. "She just needed someone to meet her where she is instead of trying to fit her into a standard mold." "Exactly. And that's why I want to offer you something different." Ava looked up sharply. "I want to hire you as Lucy's full-time private tutor and music instructor, not as household help but as an educator. The salary would be $150,000 annually, plus full health benefits and funding for any additional education or certifications you want to pursue." Ava stared at him for a long moment. "Mr. Richardson, that's an incredibly generous offer. It's what you're worth. It's what Lucy needs. And frankly, it's less than I've paid for tutors who quit after a few weeks because they couldn't handle her intellectual curiosity." "I don't know what to say." "You could say yes," David said with a small smile. "Unless you have concerns about the arrangement." Ava was quiet for a long time, and David could see her thinking through the implications. Finally, she spoke. "I do have concerns, actually. Not about Lucy. Working with her has been the highlight of my day since I started here. But about the dynamics of this kind of arrangement." "What do you mean?" "Mr. Richardson, you have a lot of power in this situation. You're offering me more money than I could make anywhere else doing what I love. That creates a dependency that makes me uncomfortable." David frowned. "I'm not sure I follow. What happens if we disagree about Lucy's education? What happens if you decide you don't like my teaching methods, or if I think Lucy needs something you're not willing to provide? In a normal tutoring situation, both parties have some equality. This arrangement puts me completely at your mercy." David hadn't considered this perspective, and it made him respect Ava even more. "What would make you more comfortable?" "I'd want a contract that protects both of us. Clear expectations about my role and authority when it comes to Lucy's education, and I'd want to maintain my weekend work." "Weekend work?" "I teach music to kids at a community center in Brooklyn. They can't pay much, but it's important to me. I want to make sure I can continue that." David thought about what he had learned about Ava's volunteer work before her accident. Even now, struggling to rebuild her own life, she was still finding ways to give back to others. "Of course. And Ava? I'd like to learn more about that program. Maybe there are ways I could help support it." Ava looked at him with surprise. "You'd want to do that? Lucy told me yesterday that you believe music should be accessible to everyone. I'm starting to think there are a lot of things I could learn from your perspective." For the first time since he had known her, Ava smiled without reservation. "Mr. Richardson, I think this arrangement might work after all." As they began discussing the details of her new position, David found himself looking forward to something he hadn't expected. learning alongside his daughter from someone who understood that education wasn't about filling empty vessels with information, but about nurturing curious minds and helping them grow, and maybe, in the process, he would learn something about being the kind of father and person he actually wanted to be. 6 months later, David was sitting in the auditorium of Lucy's school, waiting for the spring recital to begin. He had attended exactly 0 school events in the past 3 years, always finding some business emergency that required his immediate attention. Tonight, nothing could have kept him away. The lights dimmed and students began filing onto the stage. David spotted Lucy immediately. She was wearing the deep blue dress they had picked out together last weekend, her hair in the elaborate braid that Ava had taught her to do herself. But it wasn't her appearance that made David's breath catch. It was her posture. Lucy walked onto that stage like she belonged there, with confidence and joy that radiated even from the audience. The program listed her performance as Original Composition, Memories of Magic by Lucy Richardson, with additional musical arrangement by Ava Johnson. As Lucy sat down at the piano, David saw her scan the audience until she found him. She gave him a small wave and he waved back, his heart swelling with pride. Then she looked toward the back of the auditorium and smiled even more broadly. David turned and saw Ava standing near the doors, wearing a simple black dress but beaming with the kind of pride usually reserved for family members. Lucy began to play, and the auditorium fell silent. The melody was simple but hauntingly beautiful, and when Lucy began to sing in her clear, sweet voice, David felt tears start to form in his eyes. She used to sing to me when the world felt big and scary. Her voice was like a blanket that could keep away the storms. She taught me that music was magic we could carry, a light to guide us home when we feel lost and worn. The song continued, weaving together memories of Lucy's mother with lessons about love, loss, and the ways we keep people alive in our hearts. David realized that this wasn't just a performance. It was his daughter processing her grief and celebrating her mother's memory in a way that was healthy and healing. As the song reached its conclusion, Lucy's voice grew stronger, more confident. Now I make my own magic, with melodies and dreams, and though she's not beside me, I can feel her in the song. The music that she gave me flows like light through all the seams, and teaches me that love like hers forever will live on. The final notes hung in the air for a moment before the auditorium erupted in applause. Lucy stood and took a bow, her face glowing with accomplishment. Several parents were wiping their eyes, and David noticed that even some of the teachers looked emotional. After the recital, David made his way through the crowd to find Lucy. She launched herself into his arms, practically vibrating with excitement. Did you like it, Daddy? Did you hear how I used the minor 7th chord in the bridge? Miss Ava taught me that it adds emotional depth without being too dramatic. It was beautiful, sweetheart. Absolutely beautiful. I'm so proud of you. Miss Ava helped me with the arrangement, but the words were all mine. Well, except she helped me find better rhymes for some parts. Did you know there are like 50 different words that rhyme with heart, but most of them don't actually fit the emotion you're trying to express? David laughed, marveling at how his daughter could move seamlessly from profound emotion to technical analysis. I did not know that, but it makes perfect sense. Ava appeared beside them, her face flushed with pride. Lucy, that was absolutely magnificent. You should be so proud of yourself. We should be proud of ourselves, Lucy corrected. It was teamwork, remember? David watched the easy affection between his daughter and her teacher, feeling grateful in ways he struggled to articulate. Over the past 6 months, Ava had become much more than Lucy's tutor. She had become a trusted advisor, a creative collaborator, and something David hadn't expected, a friend to the whole family. Mr. Richardson, said a voice behind him. He turned to find Mrs. Patterson, the school's music director, approaching with a smile. I have to tell you, Lucy's progress this year has been remarkable. Whatever you're doing at home, it's working beautifully. That's all thanks to Miss Johnson, David said, gesturing toward Ava. She's been working with Lucy as her private instructor. Mrs. Patterson turned to Ava with interest. Have we met? I feel like I should know you from somewhere. Ava Johnson, Ava said, extending her hand. I used to perform professionally, but I work in education now. Ava Johnson. Wait, didn't you debut at Carnegie Hall a few years ago? I remember reading about that performance. The Times Review called it transcendent. David saw a brief shadow cross Ava's face, but she smiled graciously. That was a long time ago. I'm much happier doing what I'm doing now. Well, whatever brought you to education, we're all benefiting from it. Lucy's composition tonight was sophisticated work for someone her age. As Mrs. Patterson moved on to greet other parents, David found himself studying Ava's expression. Are you okay? When she mentioned the Carnegie Hall performance, Ava was quiet for a moment. It used to hurt thinking about what I lost. But honestly, tonight, watching Lucy perform something we created together, I realized I didn't lose everything. I just found a different way to make music matter. Lucy tugged on both their sleeves. Can we go get ice cream to celebrate? And can Miss Ava come with us, please? David looked at Ava. Would you like to join us for a celebration dinner? My treat, obviously. I'd love to, Ava said, but only if we can go somewhere with really good chocolate cake. Lucy's been talking about chocolate cake for a week. As they walked toward the restaurant, Lucy chattering between them about her performance and her plans for her next composition, David reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, he barely knew his daughter. He certainly didn't understand her needs, her gifts, or her dreams. Now, thanks to Ava's guidance, he was learning to see Lucy not as a problem to be managed, but as a fascinating person to be nurtured. But the changes went beyond Lucy. David found himself asking different questions about his business, thinking more carefully about the impact of his decisions on people rather than just profits. Ava's stories about the kids she taught at the community center had opened his eyes to needs he had never considered. He had quietly established a foundation to support music education in underserved schools, with Ava serving as his advisor on where the money could do the most good. Daddy, Lucy said as they settled into their booth at the restaurant, Miss Ava told me about this summer music camp for gifted kids. It's not just about piano. They do composition and music theory and even learn about the business side of music. Can I apply? David looked at Ava. Is this something you'd recommend? I think Lucy would thrive there. She's ready for that level of challenge. And being around other kids who share her passion would be good for her socially, too. Then let's make it happen, David said, enjoying the way Lucy's face lit up. Really? Even though it's expensive? David laughed. Sweetheart, your education is never going to be limited by money. If this camp is what you need, then this camp is what you'll get. As Lucy launched into excited planning for her summer, David caught Ava's eye across the table. She smiled at him, and he saw something in her expression that he had learned to recognize. Pride, not just in Lucy's accomplishments, but in his growth as a father. A year ago, David Richardson had thought he could buy his daughter the best of everything. Now he understood that the best things couldn't be bought. They had to be cultivated with patience, understanding, and love. The most valuable thing he had ever acquired wasn't a company or a property or an investment. It was the trust of his daughter and the friendship of a woman who had taught them both that real magic happened when you saw people for who they truly were, not who circumstances had forced them to become. Looking around the table at Lucy's bright face and Ava's warm smile, David realized that this simple moment in a neighborhood restaurant, celebrating his daughter's success with someone who truly understood her worth, was what happiness actually looked like. And for the first time in years, he felt genuinely excited about tomorrow, and all the tomorrows that would follow.